Syria, and there's been the beginnings of a movement in Syria. The Syrian regime actually was a deformed worker state, that's been cancelled out now. They've gone the other way. All of these, the privatizing and so on. Even in Tunisia, I think there was a big state sector. I think I'm right, Jody, under what's his name, Bourguiba, who called himself a socialist. Pardon? Yes, Fred says it was 80% state-owned in Tunisia. In Egypt also, it was mainly state-owned under Nasser. And Gaddafi the same, in Libya. But they've all gone the same way. For the last 20 or 30 years, they've been moving in the opposite direction. Privatizing, market economy, market reforms. You know, the hypocrisy of the Americans is really something. Now they say, when the whole area is in flames, they suddenly discover the merits of democracy. They supported these regimes for 20 or 30 years. They were silent about their crimes. Somewhere here I got a quote from Sarkozy. If I can find it. I can't find it. Doesn't matter. I remember what he said in 2008. He went to Tunisia and he said, "Your country is making a tremendous contribution to human rights and democracy." Great friend of Ben Ali. And Khan Strauss, isn't it, the managing director of the IMF?
Strauss-Kahn.
Strauss-Kahn, same difference. Strauss-Kahn. Khan, Strauss, who cares? Strauss-Kahn. He said, Tunisia is a model for most emerging countries. Well, for once I agree with Strauss-Kahn. Tunisia is a very good example for these countries, but not in the sense that he meant. Now, in the case of Tunisia, the movement started with an accident, you could say. I use the word accident in a dialectical sense. Hegel says that necessity expresses itself through accident. In this case, a tragic accident where this young man burnt himself to death. And there must have been other cases like that. This time, it was different. The whole thing exploded. All the conditions had matured. And therefore, it was like a powder keg waiting for the fuse. Now, I won't go through the details of the uprising itself because we dealt with it in Geordie's articles. I'll just make one point, however. All revolutions basically have got the same laws. They go through the same stages. It is amazing how history does repeat itself. History constantly repeats itself. And you see that particularly in revolutions, one of the most astounding things is how even the characters repeat themselves, same characters. Charles I of England, Louis XVI of France, and Nicholas, the Tsar of Russia, they all had a very similar character. And their wives had similar characters. Their wives played a role. And Mubarak is the same type. And his wife is the same, and Ben Ali's wife is the same type, yes. Same type. And they act in the same way. The first reaction of a regime like that is always the same. They use violence. Ben Ali had a big repressive apparatus. Because the usual argument of the reformers is, how can you have a revolution? Look, they got the state, they got the army, they got the police. Yes, that's true. Didn't Louis XVI have an army? Didn't Tsar Nicholas have an army and a police force? And in the moment of truth, all of that was swept to one side. It was marvelous what they did in Tunisia. It's a small country. And the police in all these regimes is very brutal. They use torture and they murder people. But the people fought back. They didn't have any guns. But they fought back and they showed they were not afraid. And once the fear disappears, that's it. So then, of course, Ben Ali resorted to the second tactic. Repression doesn't work, so you try concession. He made several speeches, then 3 or 4 on the television, offering concessions. The last concession that he offered was quite amusing. He said, "I have ordered the army not to fire on demonstrators. And it's very easy to order something that's already happened. The Tunisian army says, the officer said, no, we can't do this. Not for humanitarian reasons, because they understood, like the Egyptian high command understood. One bloody incident where the army would fire on unarmed demonstrators, just one, and the army would break in pieces. It would shatter in their hands. They didn't use the army because they could not use the army. On the very same night that he made that speech, what night was that, Jody? When did Ben Ali flee? I can't remember the date. The 14th of January, was it? Yes, on the night of the 13th of January. That's 1 week after the Economist said that he couldn't be overthrown. His regime wouldn't even be shaken. That's it. Ben Ali was on a plane with his suitcases packed, and they must have been very tightly packed with money, heading for France. See his old pal Sarkozy, his great friend Sarkozy. But of course, when he knocked at the door, nobody likes failure, you see. Nobody likes failure. The servant said, I'm sorry, my master is not at home. Oh, and by the way, you can't land your plane in France. You see, sirs, there's no gratitude in politics. You know? He had to go to Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis greeted him with the red carpet or a white carpet, whatever colour they used. They're very sympathetic to Ben Ali, because they might be next. Now, once this revolution had taken place, and it was a revolution, good heavens above, what's all this stupid nonsense? Oh, it's not a revolution because of this, and it's not a revolution because of that. Lenin answered that very well in 1915. In a marvellous article that's called the Discussion on Self-Determination Summed Up. Resumida. You should read that article because above all it deals very well with democratic demands. And democratic demands now are fundamental in these countries. People that have been oppressed by a dictatorial regime for decades. You see, it isn't just an economic question. We mustn't be economic determinists. Of course, unemployment and poverty play a big role, especially among the youth. 75% of young people under 30 years of age in Algeria are unemployed. The figure for Egypt is 76%. The figure for Egypt is 76%. And you'll find that there's similar figures in all the other countries. And that's an important factor, especially for a layer of university graduates, people who have... And here you see the impasse of capitalism. It's a crime of capitalism. Don't these countries need doctors? Don't they need teachers? Don't they need engineers? You know, and yet these people are unemployed graduates. There's no work for them. Also in Syria, by the way. I think that's an important... In Syria, they developed a very high level of education. You commented on that. But there's no work for these graduates. In Egypt, for example, and if a graduate cannot get work in Egypt, if an Egyptian graduate cannot get work, you can't get married, you can't have a home, you can't have a life, you can't have a future. So these are important factors. Yes, but there's something more than that, something you can't put your finger on exactly, but it is present, a feeling of humiliation. The Arab nation is a great nation. Egypt was a great civilization. And it's been enslaved and oppressed by imperialism for 100 years. More than 100 years. There's a feeling of humiliation. Egypt, for example, being subordinate to American imperialism in the Middle East. Mubarak is a stooge of Israel. Betrayed the Palestinian cause. All of these elements are present. When you refer to nationalism, well, there's an element of nationalism present, of course. And it's, in this context, it's a progressive thing. There's a burning hatred of imperialism. And there's a burning hatred of the corrupt regimes that were stooges of imperialism. Like Ben Ali was a stooge of France and America. I see that the crisis in France you referred to yesterday is partly due to certain people in the government that spent holidays as guests of Ben Ali. These Arab leaders were bought by imperialism, but they also bought politicians in Europe and America. You better believe it. You see, and therefore the psychological question is important. It's noticeable on the demonstrations. You see, in a revolution, like in a strike, you see the same process in a strike, as a matter of fact. In any strike. People that have been, that were downtrodden and people that would never do anything, apparently, if you look at the facts. But these people suddenly turn into their opposite. People that are in a strike, people that used to be always passive all their life. They develop the mentality of slaves. They suddenly raise themselves up to their true height. And it's not just a question of wage increases and so on. That's not the point. During a strike, ordinary workers feel suddenly that there's something special. They're human beings.